Is the spirituality, if you may, of this liberation theology still relevant in the Philippines? I think so, because if liberation theology is like good news that is proclaimed to the poor, to laborers, and many of our powerless, if you may, people, and those who are marginalized, I think it still has relevance. Or if you may, things that concern the poor, especially from the point of view of the gospel, I think so. It is a continuing challenge in the Philippine context, this liberation theology or the spirituality that is addressed to the poor. When I was trying to go around different, like in some seminars in the Philippines, asking people what are their top 3 concerns, 3 things came out that concern our people. Number 1, of course, the concern for finance or jobs. I think that is a very important consideration, like kabuhayan or these jobs or finance. The second one is relationships, which includes already governance and this equality of relationships, for example. The third one that really struck me was concern for health. I think that's very important, because we don't have a system of public health that is adequate enough for now. Like, for example, if you go to the public hospitals, you have a long line that are like waiting list for our poor people to get for example, the doctor's appointment. And if, for example, there is already a medical checkup, the question is the expensive medicine. So that our poor people will have to line up to the office of this Philippine Charity Sweepstakes office just to beg for example, for dialysis, for expenses, for some of the operations, etc. Or they go to the offices of the public officials, to mayor, up to or barangay, or to the public officials, so that they will have some finance for their medication or some operation that they need to to be sustained. So those 3 things are important concerns for now, no? Maybe precisely because we're still a third world country, this finance. That's why also, with regard to that, let me point out also, that's why many people like Mary Jane Veloso go abroad for this, looking for jobs, overseas workers, no? Many of our people still try to migrate to other countries, any part of the world, to look for jobs, because they want to have to help the people back in their country, especially the Philippines. So this idea of looking for jobs, especially by becoming overseas workers, I think it's still very real now. Therefore, what kind of is this liberation theology still relevant in that sense? I think so, because it challenges us, like what Amartya Sen was saying, for a third world country to become a developing country, or a country that can have more choices, if you may, has to have 3 things that from his study in terms of economics are needed. 1, the idea of upgrading the quality of education. Because in the Philippines, the 92% of our people come from the public schools. So that, according to Father Nebres, if you do not upgrade the quality of education, these people who later on will be dropouts, they say 10 out of 100, for example, will only make it for college. So many of our people, especially if they have to find jobs, these are the kind of people who will, work in government, and if the quality of public school education is not upgraded, then it affects especially the kind of democracy we have later on during elections. That's why there's still complaint about how some of our people are still if some people who run for office, they give them certain amount of money, so it's like they're buying their votes or something like that. Why? Because of this poor quality, I think, of choices or education. So that's the first one. The second one that Marchesan was talking about is good governance. Now you can see that one big election issue now is the idea of should you just run because you have experience in executive office, or should you run because you have integrity? So in other words, a big discussion right now is the issue of corruption and integrity. So I think in terms of governance, it's not just important that people have efficiency, but ethical also, and empowering leaders. That it is not just they are, you say they do certain things like they run the government, but also it is required of them to be people of integrity, because it affects, for example, the budget, or that affects education. Now, so that's for good governance. Our people are slowly asking their public officials, or those who will be put in office, to be people of integrity. I think in our earlier conversation, you were saying that how come it's a Catholic country, and then some laws that are passed are not yet pro-labor, let's say. In fact, I noticed that many of our laborers are on the contractual basis, they are just staying in work at 6 months, and then afterwards they are terminated, and then 6 months again. It takes a long time for them to be more regular. Now I don't know if that is pro-labor or whatever, because it takes really a long time to regularize our poor people, and it takes a while for them to get into another job, unless this same company will hire them again. So sometimes if they're not hired, they have to really wait, or they have to look for other jobs, the 6 months again that is allowed by them. Now, one question that can be addressed is some people are saying the people who are elected to power, those who can sustain the election, for example, those who can pay for the election campaign and sustain it, are actually the landowners. These are the people also who are in some way of the upper class. Now, if you have people who are upper class and landowners, you imagine what kind of laws that will be formulated by them, because definitely if it is not for their interest, then these laws that are supposed to be pro-labor will stall in government, if ever. In fact, I think some of the laws that we have that are still in a sense that favors the middle class businessmen, or the small businessmen rather. There are some bills, or in fact I'm not sure now, I think it's already a law that promotes this small entrepreneurship. That one I think is still okay for this, especially those who are supportive of the non-government organizations that are favoring this small entrepreneurs. No, now the question is, I'm sure, is still open. No, still open for more pro-labor, if you may, laws that hopefully can be more promoted. But the question is, can our landed, if you may, can our of the business class, and upper class, can they try to espouse certain laws that will be really respond to, like what we said earlier, pro-health, this how to have more initiatives in the country so that our people don't have to go abroad, like Jane Veloso. Because part of the difficulty that happens is our laborers are actually cut off from their families. Although there are technologies that can make them connected, but they only see them after a few, after many months, and sometimes only a month or a few weeks. Then they go away again, like our seafarers, or like some of our laborers that will find job any part of the world, including Iraq or Middle East, that are very dangerous in some way. So or even Afghanistan. The point is just to look for jobs. So perhaps one challenge that can be done in our country is that can we have more jobs available for the country, so that, and also well-paying also, so that our poor people don't have to go abroad to support their family. The other thing that I think maybe part good news also is we have a number of our graduates in the university. They go into social entrepreneurship. I think that is a welcome development. Some of our graduates look for ways of connecting this our, let's say, women or our poor people in the informal communities, and then to find connect them with some of the designers or some of the or even farmers, and connect them with some of the people in business, like designers and the women. For example, this rags to riches, when they're able to find this connection with the poor women from the informal settlers community, and then you have designers, somehow something good happens. So that is, I think, welcome news. The other good news that is happening is that, for example, some of the sari-sari stores are able to band together with some of the co-ops, the cooperatives, credit cooperatives, to support some of these small business people, like the sari-sari store we call, and to have some of our graduates, for example, help in terms of giving management skills, accounting skills, and the other connection with, let's say, some business people, to connect these small stores, owners. Part of the challenge that we have is the finding that we have a number of our children, let's say from the public schools, they are still undernourished or malnourished in some way. Before, some of them even skip meals before they go to school. So I think one of the things that some of, at least in the Ateneo and other places, they're and some companies, I think, they're trying to connect, some of our people, let's say those with means, how to support this children of the public schools, and hopefully go into some feeding program. The other thing that I hear is with regard to this improving the quality of education, like in the Ateneo here, we have some initiatives. It's called ACE program, some of the our teachers are helping upgrade some of the public schools. So I think, and even other universities, I think, help along those lines, either through science, technology, or even trying to improve just the quality of teaching in the public schools. And some of our teachers are involved with even with this working with government along those lines, the Department of Education. So I think there are some efforts to address it. The other one also that I mentioned is Ateneo, for example, has initiated these initiatives with regard to, for example, this I mentioned about public schools. The other one is the School of Governance, because it's so important to have good governance. We have put up a Ateneo School of Government, so that is one initiative that I think worth considering. The other one is many of our graduates we have a School of Medicine now, but our graduates, they have a degree not only in medicine, which they pass, but also there is a whole consideration with regard to public health. And also the other one is to teach even our doctors to have management background also. So these things that we have been talking about, public school, the quality of public school, and then the other one is what's this? This School of Government, and the other one is School of Medicine. There is a program now that is happening. We have this K-12. For example, this education that starts, I think 10 to 12, for example, in the Ateneo, it will be co-ed. And then it opens a lot of scholarships, especially to the public schools, so that there is more opportunity, for later on having good and quality education, as for example in the Ateneo. I understand that in the Ateneo there's a number of like, I don't know, 10 or 15% of scholarship in terms of the population. 10% of the population, I think, is on scholarship on various degrees. So I think there are some efforts. In other words, what I'm saying is maybe the idea of liberation theology, this idea of helping the poor, took on a different form that is affecting the quality of public schools or education, affecting governance, and then the other one is public health. So I think, maybe at least I understand here in the Ateneo, that is the effort of this, the good news for the poor, that is being translated institutionally. So, and of course, what I mentioned about the feeding program that is being addressed also. But in terms of, like what you were saying earlier, the labor, I think much has to be done in a way, before I understand, for example, Father Alejo, was involved with this church desk on labor. He was part of that, and I think they were doing some conscientization, if you may, and formation, especially for workers, and there was an effort to do that, but lately I'm not too sure, how much, for example, or how many of the church. I know we have Caritas, and I'm not sure if I think there's in terms of skills building that is being done, but I'm not sure in terms of defending the church, the rights, especially the rights of the laborers for better wages and quality of labor conditions. I'm not sure how much of that is being pushed, no? Although I know that in terms of skills building, that is being addressed, especially with regard to some some skills, no, some skills that are being addressed, no, by the church. So to upgrade the skills. This present Pope, who talks about the peripheries, who talks about the wounds of the church, who talks about this witnessing to mercy and compassion. There is in other words, there's a long tradition of that in the church. The thing is, I think, how to witness, how to not only speak for, but also to really take the side of the poor or the laborers. I think much has to be desired for that, no? Although I said earlier that there are some other forms that it took, but definitely in terms of marching in the streets, no, or I think that one has lessened for now. This idea of protesting in a way, somehow in the Philippine setting, because I think things have stabilized a little bit. Economically, it seems like the Philippines is growing, but of course it's another story how the informal settlers or how the farmers, for example, how the workers are also improving their lot. I think much has to be desired for that. Except if you, let's say, you go abroad, which some of our people, migrate, and but in the local setting, there are some new developments. For example, with regard to, I think these call centers. I think these are very popular these days, and so many jobs for our people, I think they go there, no, for the call centers. In other words, these back offices, no, from abroad, I think they're being set up here. The other thing that I think a lot of jobs are being done with regard to putting up condominiums and real estates. So it seems like that particular area of labor, in a sense, or industry, has been growing. So, and the other thing that is also good is a number of the public officials, I think they also attend this good governance that's being promoted in some way. So I think those are some good things and also challenges that we see. I said earlier that when I was asking people around the country in various seminars and fora, and different audience and different groups, I was really struck that the number 3 big concern of our people would be health. My sense is, unlike, let's say, you say Canada, unlike, let's say, Singapore, unlike Europe, no, where healthcare is really taken care of by the taxation, no, by proper use of tax. I think that will be another challenge for our people later on, how to have this, first just taxation and also proper use of the taxes and proper implementation of the tax, for our people. I think what I want to say is, at the present, it's just too expensive, for example, for our people to, one, even line up for diagnosis. That's already very hard, because you have a long line in the public hospitals. You go to Philippine General Hospital, you have a long line before our people are able to be diagnosed. Second, after our poor people have been diagnosed, the medicine is just so expensive that maybe they can try a few times. But thirdly is some of our poor people would rather die at home because it's just too expensive to carry out, for example, all these things like dialysis or buy the medicines, to take care of, let's say, heart problems, or to take care of cancer, especially cancer. These are just so expensive, these medicines that are required to support this health care. So maybe a big challenge, especially in terms of spirituality, like Pope Francis. Pope Francis talks about we have to be a field hospital. We have to see where the wounds of the church is. We have to not to be afraid to listen to the wounds of the church. Because that's where Christ is. So, and he talks about a lot, this Pope Francis, about peripheries, I think in our country, maybe these are areas that need looking into. Like what I said earlier, the top three, this continuing improvement of education, the quality of education, especially in the public schools, although I think, to be fair, I think the government is doing something about it. The second is, I said earlier, the quality of relationships that we have, which starts in the family. But also later on, part of the parenting, if you may, is the quality of governance, which is well-spent taxes, it also in terms of integrity in public office, So, and then the third that I mentioned earlier is the quality of public health. I think we have to have better public healthcare system that will address the health needs of our people. Your question is how come there are fewer, if you may, clergy or church people who get involved with, let's say, the plight of the workers? I think that's a fair observation, that to be on the side of justice, if you may, it's really a big challenge, because I think if the church or the clergy or lay people, if you may, if they begin to be involved with issues like, for example, for labor, it will really challenge the system. It will challenge the people of the status quo, if you may, and like what I said earlier, the people in government or people who are in public office, especially in the House of Representatives, if you may, or some other supposed to be public servants, if they are challenged, there will be a real they will be persona non grata in some way. They will be rejected in some way. So I think it requires a spirituality of courage, I think, prophecy, if you may. It requires a real compassion and immersion for the laborers or poor, and to understand their situation, and a real awareness and, if you may, transformation that will make them speak out for them, and even be on their side, and even push, if you may, the lawmakers to enact or to craft certain bills that will address these issues. I think the challenge, therefore, is perhaps we need more spokespeople in terms of the church who understand the situation of the laborers and the poor, to be able to witness and to voice out the side of the poor. So Yes, definitely there is a lot of challenge there. When I entered the seminary, there was a lot of exposures and immersions with the poor and different various sectors of society. The like exposure with like as a labor exposure. I work, for example, with a liquor factory. So part of the experience for 1 month. So I was like a laborer. There were also experiences to work in the hospitals, like 1 month as a novice. When I was a novice, that was part of we call them experiments. I stayed in the slum area for about a month also. So these were various, and then also 1 month in the rural area. So there were various experiments we call to make us more in touch with the base sectors or with our poor people when I was a young seminarian and also as a young scholastic. There were also occasions when, for example, like because I was a seminarian and also studying for theology, and that was a time of martial law, a time of a lot of protest movements, especially looking for good governance. So there were some occasions when there were demonstrations and protests, and I think as a seminarian and as a theologian, scholastic, I had also a chance to be part of the to be part of the protest movement. In fact, there was a time when Ramos and Enrile, they bolted out of this Marcos regime when they tried to stood up against Marcos. There was a lot of church people who got involved there, and I was a young theologian then, and I think 3rd year, and we were part of that, making a stand against this prolonged staying in power of Marcos. Yeah. So what I'm trying to say is, when I was younger, there was a lot of exposure, not a lot, but there was some exposure to that. When I became a priest, I ended up in the family ministry, and I was working with Father Nilo. We had then designed some counseling programs for the poor. So I was part of that, in a sense, designing training programs for the poor, and I was involved with him for a while in conducting this counseling for the poor seminars. And even like we have what they call tipanan, it's like marriage enrichment for the poor. So I was also part of that, to be involved with this not only marriage encounter, but this tipanan, marriage enrichment for the poor. So that was part of the experience. Later on, I went for studies, so that the focus was more on studies. But that time, the study I had was resiliency in terms of how the Filipino wife, become resilient when the husband becomes unfaithful, because that was a big issue. Even now in the Philippine setting, this infidelity of the men. I noticed that over the years, as I work in CEFAM, the Center for Family Ministries, I have tried to involve myself in terms of how we can improve those preparing for marriage, those who are married already, and those who are parents in a way. And I have been trying to listen to our people and doing some informal research as to the major concerns which you mentioned earlier. These finance, this second, this governance or relationships, and third would be the health. What I have tried to do in some of the seminars, we call them, it's like establishing virtues and values for our people. Like example, I was trying to get, we call them agimat, no? Agimat ni Apo. But basically, it's more virtues for our people that we help disseminate with different sectors, especially with working with government or character building, in other words. Confidence in times of crisis, honest assessment of one's resources and strengths, and then, for example, responsibility to be part of the solution, integrating principle and purpose, solidarity to build nation building, and then through investments that build character and excellence. So what I'm trying to say is learning from best practices. I think it's more preventive. So I tried to find some programs that will help build the character of our people. The other thing also that we tried is what we call, because we have more and more, we're affected, part of the health issue is the climate change. So part of the things that we have tried is how do we simplify these certain virtues that can help our people cope. For example, number one, we call it ano ang crisis. So like what I said earlier, what are the crises that happen in our country? Because remember, crisis is also opportunity for growth. The other one is to find out what is missing, no? Anong kulang, no? What is missing. And then third is anong kailangan ayusin. These are all K, no? So yung crisis, kulang, o kalakasan, and then so that's for the strength. The other one is for the anong kailangan ayusin. What do we need to be responsible for? What do we need to take care of? And then also ano ang we say kahulugan. So I mentioned earlier yung the crisis, no? Ano yung what kind of challenges we go through. We mentioned something about this kalakasan at kahinaan, a certain assessment of where we are. The third one is anong kailangan ayusin, what kind of things we need to address, no? Be responsible for. And then fourth is to see kahulugan, no? Somehow we have to have a big picture, a big design of things. So we need to look for meaning and purpose. And then sino kailangan kasama, no? Who are the people we need to work together, or stakeholders, different sectors of society who need to work together, schools, governance, public service, business, different kinds of people that we need, who need to work together. Bishop Clever says that the family cannot stay isolated. The family has to work with different sectors of society to effect change. And then lastly, of course, is the anong kailangan itanim, no? What kind of things we need to plant, invest now, especially for the future. So these are like preventive measures, if you may, character building that hopefully will address certain needs in our country, especially this issue of environment now and then climate change. What else have we been trying to do? As you can see, all these things are addressing communication, addressing how do we need to take care of, how do we need to build dignity, if you may, trying to build commitment. So these are all important aspects. How do we need to collaborate, no? Especially among different sectors. Lately, I've been seeing the challenge in terms of work in the family ministry, parenting. They say that we call it abakada, no? In the Philippines, abakada. A is attention. We need to give time. So, especially for kids to even do well in school. B is buong tiwala. I think we need to build confidence among our young people, to believe in them, that they have gifts, no, giftedness. Third is the idea of communication, how to listen, no, give time and by listening and communicating to our children and couples, of course. And then the fourth one is discipline. That would be a major thing, I think, the coming days. In Bahasa Indonesia, the word for batas is really line. And I think one of the things that is really challenging in our country is how do we build dignity that is not abusive through words or even actions. Because people that are aggressive or violent or bullies, if they go to government or become police or military people, I think they need to be formed in a way even early on in families, how to have some sense of discipline, which is really challenging. For me, discipline means you have a real caring for people without being abusive. So that is a challenging lesson, I think, for a lot of our parents, And then lastly, it's about the teamwork of the couple. I think it's important to recognize the dignity of each wife, husband. We call it in Tagalog, kasal. Kasal is really the marriage. Kasal is the two shall be as one, no? So you have this marriage, the two shall be as one. Teamwork. Together, everyone achieves more. But if there is an imbalance in the relationship of the couples, you have kasal become sakal, like being suffocated. And it's like they say, even in terms of research, when there is, looking down on the other, then you have a formula for divorce later. So you have kasal, if it becomes abusive, it becomes sakal, controlling, over-controlling. And then not just sakal, it becomes, and then if you control the person too much, then you have aklas, then you have a person trying to rebel. And then later on, if you have too much rebellion and you have too much control, imbalance, then you have a person who will become askal. He will just stay like a dog outside, stray dog, and then later on they will have this kalas, this separation. But like what we were saying, the call for couples is to have teamwork. How do we have teamwork in the relationship? We call it lakas. Lakas is really empowering the relationship. And like what Confucius is saying, how do you build a nation? Maybe the nation is too big. Maybe start with, if you may, become, you want to be better leaders, okay, fine. But maybe later on become a good businessman, okay. Then later on become a good parent, maybe, and maybe handle a better self. So what I'm trying to say is perhaps to affect change in our country, perhaps it might make a difference to build the character or virtues of our people, so that then we have better leaders, better parents, and one day we hope we have better people who serve in government. We start in the family, but it doesn't end there. We hope that the family can work with other sectors of society. Relationships, which includes already governance and this equality of relationships, for example. The third one that really struck me was concern for health. I think that's very important because we don't have a system of public health that is adequate enough for now. Like, for example, if you go to the public hospitals, you have a long line that are like waiting list for our poor people to get for example, the doctor's appointment. And if, for example, there is already a medical checkup, the question is the expensive medicine, so that our poor people will have to line up to the office of this Philippine Charity Sweepstakes office just to beg for example, for dialysis, for expenses, for some of the operations, etc. or they go to the offices of the like public officials, to mayor, up to or barangay, or to the public officials, so that they will have like some finance for their medication or some operation, leading the quality of education. Because in the Philippines, the 92% of our people come from the public schools. So that, according to Father Nebres, if you do not upgrade the quality of education, these people who later on will be dropouts, they say 10 out of 100, for example, will only make it for college. So many of our people, especially if they have to find jobs, these are the kind of people who will, work in government, and if the quality of public school education is not upgraded, then it affects especially the kind of democracy we have later on during elections. That's why there's still complaint about how some of our people are still if some people who run for office, they give them certain amount of money, so it's like they're buying their votes or something like that. Why? Because of this poor quality, I think, of choices or education. So that's the first one. The second one that Marchesan was talking about is good governance. Now you can see that one big election issue now is the idea of should you just run because that they need to to be sustained. So those three things are important concerns for now, no? Maybe precisely because we're still a third world country. This finance. That's why also, with regard to that, let me point out also, that's why many people like Mary Jane Veloso go abroad for this, like looking for jobs, overseas workers. No? Many of our people still try to migrate to other countries, any part of the world, to look for jobs because they want to have to help the people back in their country, especially the Philippines. So this idea of looking for jobs, especially by becoming overseas workers, I think it's still very real now. Therefore, what kind of is this liberation theology still relevant in that sense? I think so, because it challenges us, like what Amartya Sen was saying, for a third world country to become a developing country, or a country that can have more choices, if you may, has to have three things that from his study in terms of economics are needed. One, the idea of upgrade is the spirituality, if you may, of this liberation theology still relevant in the Philippines. I think so, because if liberation theology is like good news that is proclaimed to the poor, to laborers, and many of our powerless, if you may, people, and those who are marginalized, I think it still has relevance. Or if you may, things that concern the poor, especially from the point of view of the gospel, I think so. It is a continuing challenge in the Philippine context, this liberation theology, or the spirituality that is addressed to the poor. When I was trying to go around different, like in some seminars in the Philippines, asking people what are their top three concerns, three things came out that concern our people. Number one, of course, the concern for finance or jobs. I think that is a very important consideration, like kabuhayan, or these jobs or finance. The second one is you have experience in executive office, or should you run because you have integrity. So In other words, a big discussion right now is the issue of corruption and integrity. So I think in terms of governance, it's not just important that people have efficiency, but ethical also, and empowering leaders. That it is not just they are, you say they do certain things like they run the government, but also it is required of them to be people of integrity, because it affects, for example, the budget, or that affects education. Now, so that's for good governance. Our people are slowly asking their public officials, or those who will be put in office, to be people of integrity. I think in our earlier conversation, you were saying that how come it's a Catholic country, and then some laws that are passed are not yet pro-labor, let's say. In fact, I noticed that many of our laborers are on the contractual basis, they are just staying in work at 6 months,